Hi everyone, I'm Jamie and today I'm going to be teaching about if, else and else if statements in Python. So what are if, else and else if statements in Python? Well, an if statement is a declaration. It's something that checks whether something equals something or doesn't. An else statement is something that checks the previous if statement and see if that applies to what you're actually trying to figure out. And if it doesn't, else is the declaration which says what will happen now. And an else if statement is an if statement that applies to the previous statement. And if not, it's a new statement, but we use it just to save processing power. Okay, so let's head into the idle and start our program. Okay, let's drag this shell onto the left side of our screen. Create a new window and drag that to the right of our screen. Okay, so now we have our program. Right, so we have to actually define a few things here to use if, else and else if statements. We need to use our variables and printing, which we're very familiar with now, hopefully. Okay, so let's start with myInt, and we're going to do int, parentheses, input, quotation marks, and we're going to ask a user for a first number. And we're going to do this 3 times, so let's copy this. Alright, and let's do it again and again, but this time let's do 2 and let's do 3. But we have to make sure that we're updating the variables, so let's actually define these as 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so there are variables. So if we save this program, and we save it as, and let's just call it program1, and we run this, you can see that we're asked for a number. So let's type in 6, we'll type in 3, and we'll type in 2. So that's good, the program can store our information and remember it, but what can we actually do next? Well, this is where our if statements come in. So we need to declare if, and then we need to do our variable, so myInt1, and then we're going to do greater than 10. Okay, so this is saying if this first number that we've entered, so if 6 in this case is greater than 10, this colon then represents the word then. So if my integer 1 is greater than 10, then what will happen next? So I'm going to print, and then we're going to do my int 1, and then we're going to do comma is greater than 10. Okay, and this is where our else if statements come in. So let's do elif. Okay, and let's print my integer 2 is greater than 10. Okay, and let's do another else if statement. Print my integer 3 is greater than 10. Okay, so let's see what this code is doing so far. So we're asking a user for a number, and we're asking for another number, and then we're asking for another number again. Okay, and then once the program has this information and can use it and manipulate it, we're checking to see if the first number entered is greater than 10. And then we're checking to see if the second number entered is greater than 10 also, because else if is the same as this statement, except we're not going to do it exactly the same, because that would use more processing power, CPU, than we have to. So we're doing else if just to repeat this statement, and we don't have to actually write any more things. So we're checking to see if integer 2 is also greater than 10, and then we're checking to see if integer 3 is also greater than 10. Okay, so let's do else statements now. So if we can remember, the else statement is something that doesn't apply to all of this. So if the program has checked all of this, so if these 3 numbers don't or aren't bigger than 10, then what will happen next? Or if integer 1 isn't bigger than 10, or if integer 3 or 2 isn't bigger than 10, what will happen to the remaining numbers? Okay, so let's do some more printing. So print my integer 1, comma, is not greater than 10. Okay, so now we're saying that this piece of code isn't greater than 10. So let's print my integer 2 is also not greater than 10. Okay, and let's again print my integer 3 is not greater than 10. Okay, so let's review what this program is doing. We're asking a user for a first number, asking a user for a second number, and we're asking for a third number. And then the program is checking rather, whether the first number entered is greater than 10. And then if the number is greater than 10, it will print that the number is greater than 10. It will notify a user of what is happening. And then else if is a repeat of this statement, except it applies for integer 2 and that it's greater than 10. And also we're repeating this statement again for integer 3 to notify the user that it is greater than 10. And then the else statement applies to all of this to see if this doesn't check out correctly. So if none of this applies to the statements, then we're going to print that integer 1, 2 or 3 is not greater than 10. Okay, let's run this program and see what happens. First we have to save it. Oh, invalid syntax. Alright, so I've realised where I've gone wrong. We actually need to do my integer 2 greater than 10. So we actually need to include the condition that we're using in this statement, because it can't remember what this is since it's already collected its data. It then goes on to a different statement, so it can't actually reference to the previous one, and therefore it doesn't work out. Okay, so let's try and run this program now. So the program is asking us for a first number, 6, 7, but remember one of the numbers or all of them have to be greater than 10. So I'm going to choose number 3 to be 11 because that is greater than 10. And it will tell me that 11 is greater than 10. Because what it's going to do is it's going to choose the largest number, the only number in the sequence that is greater than 10 out of the 3 numbers, and it will pick that number. So let's actually run it again. Okay, so we're going to choose 23, 11, and 6. So what it will do, even if other numbers are bigger than 10, it will choose the greatest number that is greater than 10. Okay, so let's see what will happen if we type in numbers that are not greater than 10. So 3, 2, and 1. It will tell me that 3 is not greater than 10, 2 is not greater than 10, and 1 is not greater than 10. Okay, so let's conclude some things. Okay, so we're going to do a comment, and we're going to do if, and we're going to write down what if statements are to help us to remember it. So an if statement is a declaration that checks if something is something. Okay, and let's do else. Okay, declaration that checks if something wants a previous statement. So what we're doing is that an if statement is a declaration that checks if something is something. An else statement is a declaration that checks if something isn't something once a previous if statement has checked it already. And then we're moving on to our else if statement. So our else if or our elif statement is a declaration that reapplies an if statement without actually using one. Okay, and then in brackets, save CPU usage. Okay, so now we know that an if statement is a declaration that checks if something is something, an else statement is something that checks back to that if statement to see if something isn't something, and then an else if statement is a repeat of the previous if statement with new conditions that checks if something is something. If else, and else if statements interest you, then you might want to check out other Python tutorials on my channel. In the last Python tutorial, I set you a challenge. I asked you if you could use the type float with input, but in this tutorial I'm challenging you to see if you can actually create a program that checks to see if a number is lower than 5. You may base the program off of the program displayed in this video if you must. Print screen your results and post them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.